Well, you raised the question that when we talk about science and religion should work together, and then people should use their reason and the logic, that some people are not educated, they really don't know better, and so on. That's a good question. It seems to me that, of course, education is very important, particularly in the Baha'i faith, and we need to educate our children, and we always need to be on the path of search and more learning. But it also seems to me that it is not so much academic learning, although academic learning should help us broaden our mind and our horizon, but there are many educated people who are bigots, whose minds have not really been opened. So it's a combination of education with humility, with sincerity, with sanctity and purity of heart and soul. These are all related. As you said, Baha'u'llah explains these things in 7 valleys. But it seems to me that sincerity and that love alone is not enough. That sincerity and love should be combined with purity of the heart and soul, with our mind and logic and reason. Because other than that, we can go astray. I don't question that much the sincerity of a lot of those popes and crusaders who went and maimed and killed for 200 years. Many of them had pure heart and they wanted to do it for the sake of Jesus. By the same token, many of these Muslim fanatics who caused so much damage, a lot of them are sincere. In their belief they're sincere, But they're not using the God-given logic and reason and make it the totality of God is one and humanity is one race, and we have to always remain humble and loving and kind. They don't use it in this totality, and they could be educated. They said that the head of one of these terrorist groups is an educated man. A couple of these terrorist groups, but they're not using that its totality, and then it leads them to these violent acts. Well, you told me that you don't believe in God and you don't believe in heaven and hell, but then you say that for the rest of us, human beings, it's probably a good idea because at least if they're really believers, they believe in heaven and hell and fire and damnation and this and that, they will try to behave and they'll be good people for leading their lives. Well, this kind of logic and this kind of reasoning is not good enough for me. Perhaps 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, when most people were not educated, and there was, in the holy books, they would put a lot of fear in people's heart, and fire and damnation and being in fire forever and this and that would probably work. But as you say, just like yourself, for an educated man of today, I don't think this kind of reason and this kind of logic holds for a lot of people. And as we see more and more educated people, if we continue with this approach in our mosques and in churches and synagogue, we will see more and more people become atheists. Who say, I don't believe in any kind of that kind of stuff. But my understanding of the Baha'i writings is that heaven is becoming a better person. Heaven is constantly working on our higher side of becoming a better human being. And hell is the opposite of that. And just we see in our daily lives, if somebody's criminal, somebody, all his life is through stealing and lying and not being truthful and backbiting, all of these things that are forbidden in religions, or becoming a terrorist and this and that. This is hell. This is hell. And so Baha'u'llah's explanation is that heaven is being close to God, which means remaining virtuous, or working toward that perfection, which is nothing but God Himself. We will never be perfect, but we can work in that direction. And hell is the opposite of that. Hell is being on that route. And then if we can train our children to think of heaven and hell in this fashion, I think it's much easier in our mind, and it's much more logical. And perhaps if a person like you, where you were trained in that fashion, you would not become so antagonistic to our religion. But we are friends. I think there's still time. We can work on you. Thank you. Well, your secondary or complementary question is that, well, what do you know about the other world? I tell you, I don't know anything about the other world. But I've come to this point that have seen the life of Baha'u'llah, the teachings of Baha'u'llah, the reasoning and logic of Baha'u'llah, and the way he trains us to be logical. And he tells us that it is beyond our understanding. But he teaches us that goodness, for the goodness sake, and thinking of God as embodiment of virtue is a good thing. And so this is the way he trains, he wants to train humanity to work on that path. And then, that is then based on faith. He says, then you lead this kind of life, and that journey, after the body is disintegrated, continues forever. And so that is the question of faith, no question. I can't give you much reason beyond that, but I do encourage you to read hundreds of pages of his reasoning and logic with regard to this purity of heart, sanctity of soul, and this everlasting journey toward betterment of self, or getting rid of self and becoming one with the Master of the universe. Whatever that is, the nature of it, we cannot know, and we will never know. This other point, the journey of soul, the way all manifestations of God have explained, is that that's an everlasting journey toward perfection, which we call God. And then you ask, then what about those who have done all those bad things and they don't believe any of this stuff? Our understanding is that there's goodness, and that badness is darkness. So the way Baha'u'llah explains it is light versus darkness. And then Abu Baha explains that darkness by itself does not exist. Darkness is absence of light. So if somebody is full of those kind of things, he's in darkness. We can't really blame God for it. But in effect, but if there's grace of God, he doesn't want to leave his children alone. Even after our death, those people who are in darkness, he wants to continue to help us. This is where in the Seven Values, Baha'u'llah explains that for those kind of people, it may take hundreds of thousands of years. Not that God is not gracious, but he wants us to try. If he's not trying, what can he do? He's not trying. He wants us to try, then he would help us. He would pick us up. I was invited to the Islamic Center together with a number of other distinguished individuals from different faiths. If I remember correctly, we had a Methodist minister, an Episcopalian minister, a minister from United Church, a minister from Unity Church, a minister from Unitarian Universalists, ministers from the One World Spiritual Center, and an Islamic scholar or imam, and myself. There were 10 or 12 of us, and every time we get together, we raise a question. The question this time was on the question of faith, the meaning of faith, and everyone was sharing their thoughts. And here's, if I made a correct note, here's somewhat the friends had said, that faith means trusting beyond ourselves. Faith means a way to heal the world. Faith is honoring the goodness of all creation. Faith is connecting ourselves to something greater than us as human beings. Faith is your path and your path is a divine idea of joy and peace. Faith is believing in Jesus Christ as our Savior, and through Him to reach the divine. Then, from another perspective, somebody said faith and science are complementary, or should be complementary. It was mentioned that faith is there is inherent goodness in all people. It's also mentioned by one person at least that that faith to the greater number of our people in our congregation does not make any sense at all, because it is logic and reason that makes sense, and for the most part what many people call faith is the things that are unbelievable, and that's what they call, we say we can't really put any logic or mental logic on it, but we just believe in it because our faith says so. And this minister from one of these groups mentioned that not in our congregation, for the most part, we defy that kind of faith. Anyway, so this was quite educational. I learned a lot. And then I had recorded a few days earlier something on the question of faith based on Baha'i writings. And I shared with them the Baha'i perspective. And I began in saying that, at least to Baha'is, it seems to us that there's absolutely no conflict in the spiritual path of all religions. If we think there is any difference, it's because of our misperceptions. It's because we could not articulate it. It is because we need to go back to the holy writings, because we need to further purify ourselves, sanctify ourselves, and our heart becomes connected. And then that connection of heart becomes, and then we really speak heart to heart. Then we see what the prophet, what the manifestation, what Jesus, Moses, Krishna, Buddha, Muhammad, the Bab, Baha'u'llah, Zoroaster have said. And then, at least from the Baha'i perspective, we see that this is all one and the same. That we had some misperception. And perhaps that's the reason why there are so many sects, because somebody who was more powerful, was more authoritarian, he said that this is the way to do it, and then a lot of people followed that path. At least from the Baha'i perspective, this is one path, and we need to come together. And that's perhaps another reason for this interface, that not only we talk to each other, but although there's not enough time, but we try to reason and see whether we understood it or we did not understand. We keep asking questions. So anyway, I had this handout and I shared with them the Baha'i writings. Again, also from the Baha'i perspectives, we reason, but we go back to the holy writings. We don't understand it, we ask questions. So Abdu'l-Baha tells us that faith is meant first conscious knowledge, and second the practice of good deeds. Baha'u'llah says, the essence of faith is fewness of words and abundance of deeds. He whose words exceed his deeds, know verily his death is better than his life. And then again Baha'u'llah tells us, O friend, the heart is the dwelling place of eternal mysteries, make it not the home of dwelling fancies. And then in another passage, Abdu'l-Baha tells us that know ye that God has created in man the power of reason. That's why in the Baha'i faith, faith and reason should go together. If we just based on faith alone, we believe in something which is not logical. My understanding of Baha'is perspective is that if it's not logical, if it doesn't make sense, it just doesn't make sense. Moses did not part the sea. Moses did not throw his stick to become a snake. The world was not made in 6 days. Jesus physically did not go to heaven. Muhammad did not cut the moon in half, as some people would say. All of these things are parables, are are stories that have deeper meaning behind them. And many people in different religions read them and believe in them literally. And I think that this way of thinking leads us to prejudice and superstitions and becoming fanatic. And so therefore one of the important principles of the Baha'i faith is that faith and reason, science and religion should work together in harmony. If it's not harmonious, there's a problem. So I shared with them a number of passages. The other passages I shared is this, that through the power of faith, obey ye the teachings of God, and let all your actions conform to His laws. So this means that after you truly investigate, search for truth, and understand, for example, that all Baha'u'llah's writings make sense for today, and you believe in him, and you sign the card, then that's the point then that you go and obey his laws. When you say pray, you pray. When you say you need to fast, you fast. These are then after I have come to this point of conviction, and then I follow his laws. And I concluded with this passage from Abdul Baha's writing, that the cornerstone of the religion of God is the acquisition of the divine perfections and the sharing of his manifold bestowals. The essential purpose of faith and belief is to ennoble the inner being of man with the outpourings of grace from on high. So ultimately then when we have faith with reason, but also we become humble in order to accept and understand the higher being, then the outpouring of his grace comes to us. And then Abu Baha says that if this be not attained, it is indeed deprivation itself. It is a torment of infernal fire. Now you raise the question with regard to Baha'is, and the question of equality between men and women, which is one of the important principles of Baha'i faith, and then why women cannot become members of universal justice. Well, I can tell you this much. As we spoke earlier, you start with the question of faith, and you use your reason and logic, and you investigate, and then when you totally accept the Baha'i faith, then you go and look at his laws and you obey the laws. But then, even then, if we have questions, we keep asking questions. So one question that a person like you, who is you're still investigating, raise is that why women are not members of universal justice. The short answer, based on faith, is that Abdul Baha tells us that the reason and logic for this would become clear for you in the future. But for me, as a fallible human being who thinks about this issue, I would explain it in this fashion. When Baha'u'llah talks about equality in rights between men and women, he does not say that the duties and jobs should be the same. But as we know, Baha'is are members of local spiritual assemblies, national spiritual assemblies, they're counselors, they're auxiliary board members, and all through the life of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi, for this period of some 100 years, we have had many women who were hands of the cause. And if there is any individual who has authority within the faith, it is hands of the cause, those who are considered really assistant of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi. Many of them were women, like Clara Dunn and Mrs. Keller and Martha Root and Dorothy Baker and Ruhi Khanum and some others. So, in that respect, women and men, but they were both hands of the cause. But here, he has decided, at least at this stage of human development, there are still 60-70 parts of the world which are totally chauvinistic. There's still part of the world which is at least in part chauvinistic. We're still working for the equality and rights between men and women. And in his divine wisdom, Baha'u'llah thought, at this stage of human development, members of the Universal Justice should be men, and we obey it. Let me also mention that in many ways, I think you came yourself to that realization that in some ways, Baha'u'llah gives more right to women. Abdul has explained that if you have two children, one is a boy, one is a girl, and the parents don't have enough money, the girl should be educated first because she will become mother, and that is more important than the boy becoming educated. So in many ways, you see and you think that perhaps Baha'u'llah has given more rights to women, but then in its totality, he tells us equality between the rights of men and women is essentially important, but that does not mean that they have the same functions.